name is John Hurt, and a few years ago I had the great pleasure of having Quentin Crisp introduce a show that I did called The Naked Civil Servant, which was an autobiography of his own life. And this evening it is my incredible pleasure to be able to introduce him in his own show, An Evening with Quentin Crisp. When I first met Quentin, it was at art school, and I drew and painted him, though I was unaware of the fact at the time. And I was unaware that several years later, I would be requested to play him as an actor. He's always referred to the latter years of his life as the twilight of his life. And after the success of Naked Civil Servant, I suggested to him that he could not any longer call it the twilight of his life, but the sunset of his life. And tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce the Quentin Crisp.
Thank you, and good evening. I've been forbidden to describe this occasion as a straight talk from a bent speaker. So instead we'll say it's like a consultation with a psychiatrist who is madder than you are. Because what I want to do is to cure you of your freedom. I'm convinced that it's an excess of freedom which has made everybody in the world so miserable. In England, I never have any difficulty persuading people that they're unhappy. The trouble comes when I tell them that they're free. Nobody seems to make any comparison between himself and somebody in the same circumstances in a time gone by. This amazes me. I come from a time when there was so little liberty that if a girl wanted to wear nail varnish, she had to leave home for good. And if a man wore suede shoes, moral obliquity written on every toe. 40 years ago, there would have been nothing for you to do but join the Foreign Legion. Now you all wear, do, say whatever you like. And in England, we enjoy the greatest freedom of all. We need never, never work. It's true, when we've used up the last possible grant for the last possible subject, we can go on to a thing called national assistance. Now, unlike others of my generation, I would be happy for all the people who find themselves in these blissful circumstances if I felt that they were happy. But wherever I look, people are not singing, they are shouting. They are not dancing, they are marching. They are not rejoicing, they are complaining. In fact, we can safely say that throughout the world, protest has become a game any number can play. One weekend in London, my landlady got into the wrong march. That'll show you what's going on there. So I must assume that what has made everybody in the world suddenly so angry is the element which has been added to their lives in recent times, their freedom. I know it's no good asking you to abide by laws handed down to you by your pastors and your masters and your elders and your betters. It's too late for that. So what I think we need is chains of our own making. Now, however heavy these may be, they will never feel as irksome as limitations placed on us by others. Not any old chains. What we need is a system, and the system begins with each of us trying to decide what it is that makes him the way he is. It involves a journey to the interior, not altogether a pleasant excursion. Because as well as totting up what you consider to be your assets, you also have to take a long look at what your friends call the trouble with you. Nevertheless, the journey is still worth making. Indeed, we might say that the whole purpose of existence is to try to reconcile the glowing opinion we have of ourselves with the terrible things that other people say about us. And the synthesis of these two opposite opinions will be your identity. But that's not quite enough. It's like your fingerprints. These two are your very own, but if they are discovered, they may be used against you. Therefore, you have to polish up your raw identity until it becomes something glittering by which you are prepared, by which you are proud to be identified, and with which you can do barter with the outer world to get from it what you want. I won't say what you deserve, because if we all got what we deserved, we would starve. And this polishing up process will give you a set of rules of your own choosing, which will make your days so formal that compared with them, the life of a Trappist monk would seem like an orgy. Indeed, your style will become like a religion. You will be able to consult it in all moments of doubt. You will always be able to say in any situation, is what I am doing or saying or even wearing compatible with my chosen image of myself? I know I'm rattling on about problems which by world standards would be considered trivial. This I understand, but I do so because never a day goes by, well, never a month goes by without someone coming to me and saying, oh, you do have a nice life. Me? This would be a reasonable remark to make if I lived as all of you do, in mansions riddled with standard of living. But I don't. I live in one room which has never been cleaned in 35 years. And that brings me to my first message of hope. Never sweep the place where you live, because after the first 4 years, the dirt doesn't get any worse. It's just a question of not losing your nerve. I'm sure I'm right about this. The other day, a woman said to me, no wonder you're nice to everybody. You never do any housework. So now it would seem that all the women in the world are in a blind rage by 10:30 in the morning. Worn out, I shouldn't wonder, with all that sweeping, dusting, washing the dishes. Now, there's no need to do the dishes unless you find that you've passed the fish barrier. It works like this. When you're hungry and you look at your plate and it says bacon, you think, I could eat an egg. And the next day, when your plate says egg, you think, I could eat a fish. But when you've eaten a fish, you have to do the dishes. I'm only telling you these things so as to set you free from these boring domestic rituals. I want to give you a little time during each day when you stop thinking about other people and start thinking about yourself. When you give up looking outward and begin to look inward, so as to decide who you truly are and where you're really going. And now the next thing that my visitors say is, oh, you do know such wonderful people. And I do, but this also would only be a logical comment if my room was stuffed with people of wealth, substance, influence. And it isn't. It's crammed with the riffraff of London. And that brings me to my second message of hope. Never try to keep up with the Joneses. Drag them down to your level. It's cheaper. And then I'm asked, where do I meet these wonderful people? And I say, as a rule, in cafes. And in the days when layabout cafes were still open, those marvelous places where you could sit through lunch and tea and supper with 1 cup of coffee. I used to offer to take my friends to one, but they always uttered the words, "Of course, when we get there, you'll have to tell me what to say." I hope I'm painting for you a thoroughly depressing picture of someone who seems to be living like a kidnap victim, in unwanted and unnecessary isolation, only a few yards from where the traffic of the world is going by, with nothing more substantial boarding up the windows than self-doubt. The words, "You'd have to tell me what to say," are a key. They show us that we are not dealing with a dreary old search for true love. The person who goes to cafes in the hope of making friends doesn't have to think what to say. He has to learn how to listen. We'd all like to have friends, but if it means you've got to listen, the price is ridiculous. So what does he want? As I see it, he longs for somewhere to go. And when he gets there, for somebody to be. But who? When modern man looks round in search of a destiny, nothing presents itself to him as it did when I was young, as being suited to his age, appropriate to his sex, befitting his station in life. Nowadays, whichever direction he looks in, his eyes run to the very limits of the horizon. He finds himself in a landscape without signposts, without milestones, without roads. The sheer vastness of the opportunities that lie before him may make him feel small. Now, if we are going to develop this lifestyle, we must banish forever all thoughts which are self-diminishing. We mustn't imagine when we make this journey to the interior that anything we discover is too trivial or even too distasteful to present to the world. The curiosity of the neighbors about you is a tribute to your individuality, and you should encourage it. Never try to defend yourselves. I'm appalled by the lust for evasion, which seems to be absolutely everywhere, even among actors, who presumably are a nation of exhibitionists. Yet even they say that they want to draw the line somewhere. The Burtons, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, were so great that they brought style to marriage. And then they brought style to divorce. But even they expressed the fear that the press photographers of Rome would take pictures of them in the WC. Now, the way to deal with that problem, if you think it is one, is not to build a higher and higher wall round your villa, but to learn to urinate with style. All concealment is wrong. If there were none, half the problems of the world would disappear overnight. There would be no snooping, and therefore no fixing. There would be no blackmail, and therefore no fear in the world other than physical fear. That wouldn't be a bad start. And not only is all secrecy a sin, but it also isn't going to work. My spies tell me that there are already in existence machines which can collect and tabulate all the relevant detail about the private life of everybody in this theater, and can then condense it and store it forever in a space that big. Now, if this can be done, it will be done, because machines are greater than men. If you doubt this proposition for a moment, let me tell you about the atom bomb. It wasn't built by a wild fanatic trying to bring the vengeance of an angry God onto a wicked and adulterous generation. That means you. No, the bomb was made by a man with a noble forehead and silver hair, sitting in the middle of an American desert and cutting up the atom while saying, "Pity." Bang! So now we know, whatever you hoped, whatever you dreamed, the machines will triumph in the end. And if this is so, our attitude toward them should be existential. Do you understand that word? An existentialist is simply somebody who realizes that he can only exercise his free will by swimming with the tide, but faster. So if the machines will triumph in the end, why don't we make ourselves over to them from the very beginning? And the bomb is not all. By 1984, riveted into the wall of every home in America will be a one-way television screen through which you will see nothing, which might be a relief. But through it you will be watched by Big Brother. Now, George Orwell, who foresaw this situation and who wrote 1984, he became completely neurotic about it. But why? I don't know how things are in Los Angeles, but in London, we waltz round the city with half our hair painted pink and the other half painted green, jingling with amulets, razor blades, safety pins, creating no sensation whatsoever. And when we get home, we feel thoroughly defeated. But now we know that in less than 4 years' time, when you get back to your room, you will still be of abiding interest to somebody. The president will care. Now, all you have to do to get this situation onto your own terms is to decide what image of yourself you are going to present to his eternal scrutiny. It isn't difficult. No alibis are acceptable. I say this because whenever I suggest to anybody that he should develop his lifestyle, he immediately says, I'm not wise enough, witty enough, handsome enough. Beauty is a complete waste of time. Because even now, and even here, miles from the Mediterranean, without even knowing it, we still cringe in the dreary shadow of classical ideals of beauty. The Greeks were mad about the human body, so much so that during its heyday, Athens must have looked like an outfitter's window during a weaver's strike. But it was no help. Not one of the great classical statues has the least physical individuality, which would make it desirable or even interesting. So beauty you will never need. But I can give you further proof. There was once a man whose name was Mr. Tillet, but he was known as the Angel. I saw him in the streets of London. He was shorter than I am, but he was twice as wide, and his head was as long from the chin to the crown as the skull of a donkey. His pate was bald, but the rest of his body was covered with fur, right down to his fingernails. When his employer first saw him, she fainted. Nevertheless, he made more money in 4 short years in the all-in wrestling ring than the divine Joe Louis made out of a lifetime as a boxer. Now, to me, Mr. Tillet's life is a positive parable of style. He took that which made him so like himself, regardless of whether it made him better or worse than other people in their eyes, and he put it in its appropriate setting. He put it where it would do the most good. And that, as I see it, is what all of us have to learn to do. Are you with me so far? Do you understand this argument? I've been forbidden to rattle on about the amount of money that Mr. Tillet made. I've been told that I equate wealth with style. I don't, but I would say this. To a physicist, money would be the solid state of style. Otherwise than that, there's no connection between the two. And of this also, I can give you an example. Until recently, in Soho, the hooligan district of London, there was a woman known as the Countess, and not without cause. But in spite of her aristocratic pretensions, she had in fact no fixed address, no means of support, and her body was perpetually bent double from a lifelong habit of looking in the dustbins to see if she could find there something she could possibly sell to a kind friend. Or if not, that she herself could use. And one day, in a trash can in the most expensive part of London, she found a complete backless bead dress. She longed for night to fall so that she could nip into a dark doorway and try it on. But by about 6:30, her patience had worn out. It was barely dusk, but she went into a churchyard in the middle of London, and there she proceeded to take off her clothes. This caused a crowd to collect, and the crowd caused a policeman to collect. And the next day, in court, when the magistrate said, "And what exactly were you doing, stripping among the dead?" she replied, "I was doing what any woman would be doing at that hour, changing for dinner." So you see, however grandiose the style you may be about to choose for yourself, you won't need any actual money to support it. And furthermore, you won't need talent. Now, I never saw Sarah Bernhardt on the stage, but I have seen a strip of movie showing her coming into the home stretch in Camille. The death scene. On a rather tatty couch, which looks like that, sits Armand, and he supports Miss Bernhardt in a very defensive sort of way, as though she was some kind of a firecracker. Which in a way she was. And she lies opposite him, and she wears a minimum risk nightdress. And she has clown's makeup, and her hair is down to about here. Now, someone must have told her it was a silent movie. But did she care? No. The moment the cameras began to turn, her black lips started to move faster than those of a policeman giving corrupt evidence. And when her lips moved, her eyes began to roll. And when her eyes moved, a hand shot out into the air, returning later to give her a terrible blow on the chest. Sometimes it was one arm, sometimes it was the other arm, sometimes it was both arms together, and then as abruptly as all this activity had begun, it stopped. Her arm swung down in front of the couch like the limb of a rag doll. Now, I'm not just trying to foist upon you my own Philistine reactions, because this movie was shown at the National Film Theatre of London, and that is a building so highbrow that no one can obtain admission to it unless he can prove that he comes from one of the cheese and wine belts of England. It was no help. The audience choked with derisive mirth. A man near me fell out into the gangway. His feet twiddled in the air. La divine, indeed. It wasn't her acting that made Miss Bernhardt divine, it was her nerve. Oh, and it was the coffin she slept in at night. And it was the cheetah that dragged her on a gold chain through the rooms of her house. Not that I'm suggesting that any of you should build a coffin, nor that you should keep a pet. We've got enough dumb friends without them. I'm only explaining that you won't need any talent in order to be able to project your chosen image of yourself. And nowadays, you don't even need virtue. You no longer have to be an object of public veneration or even affection. If you like, you can be the focus of contempt or hatred. After all, as a test of whether you're still in touch with somebody else, being loved can never be a patch on being murdered. That's when someone really has risked his life for you. And if you've decided on depravity as the fluid in which you will suspend your monstrous ego, then you have the most wonderful examples before you, or rather behind you, because nearly all of them are in history. In medieval France, living at the same time as Joan of Arc, there was a great French nobleman called Gilles de Rais, and he murdered 150 choir boys in a lifetime. Now, quantity is not style. All the same, it's difficult not to be impressed, isn't it? When he was caught, de Rais brought off an effect which I wouldn't advise any of you to attempt if you're just beginners. He reversed his style. Now, before you can do that, you must be absolutely certain that the image that you're taking up is more blinding than the one that you've abandoned. On the first day of his trial, de Rais was his usual imperious self, refusing to take any notice of what his accusers told him on the grounds that they were not his equals. On the second day, he repented. He confessed so long, so loud, so much, that the bishop who was trying his case rose and covered with a cloth the face of the crucifix hanging on the courtroom wall. Now, I tell you this only to show you that style begets style. It's important because it means that when you've completed your image of yourself, you won't be surrounded by born receivers of the news. Your style will magnetize toward you other stylists, and you will be able to enjoy them and yourself. Finally, when he was condemned to death, de Rais cried out, "I am redeemable." And this brought people from far and wide throughout France to pray for his soul. Now, if that is not style, it is at least gesture on a national scale. All brought about by one man. But of course, before you can build some such dizzy, dazzling structure as a monument to yourself, you must first get the foundations of your private life absolutely solid. From now onward, I think you should try to regard your home as your dressing room, and possibly your rehearsal room, and the world will become your stage. And at home, there must be nothing which doesn't represent the kind of person you have decided to become. It doesn't matter if your house is full of gadgets which are advertised on television every 20 minutes. They've got to go. And when you've got rid of the superfluous things, you start on the unnecessary actions. You should try to avoid all drifting and doodling and dawdling. And I used to say there must be no daydreaming. But when I was in St. Andrews University, a student said, "But our style is built out of our daydreams." And this seemed to me a wonderful thing to have said. So now I've altered my opinion, and I think you're allowed your dreams up to the age of 25. Well, after that, they may become an alibi. Do you understand me? It's no good running a pig farm badly for 30 years while saying, really, I was meant to be a ballet dancer. By that time, pigs will be your style. And of course it follows logically that if there's to be no doodling and no dawdling, there are to be no evening classes. Do you have evening classes in Los Angeles? Well, it's all right if we're going to learn to sing and dance, because these are activities, the results of which you take out into the world with you and wear like a crown. People who've learned to sing will always have richer, rounder voices. And people who've learned to dance will always have bigger, bolder movements. But as for pottery and basket weaving, what good are they? The moment the doors of the Evening Institute clang shut behind you, you're where you started. On the way home, you might get into an argument with somebody at a street corner, and be left saying, well, I can't express myself. You'll have to come and see my baskets. Good, we're agreed. They are not an adequate, they are not a communicable form of self-expression. And when you've got rid of the unnecessary actions, you start on the superfluous people. Now, I've been forbidden to say that each of you must live alone. I'm told that my attitude toward cohabitation is glib. So I will lean toward true love, sufficiently to say that if you're actually stuck with somebody, you better stagger on with them. It's the very best I can do. Until recently, I had no opinions whatsoever about cohabitation. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I've become a kind of mail-order guru. People write to me, or they telephone me, and then they come and see me. Now, most of the people who do this are very young indeed, and I know why they visit me. It's in order to get the edge on their parents. Recently, a girl of 15 turned up. She got me to write my name on a piece of paper, and the very moment that I stopped, she said, I can't make up my mind whether to show this to my mother or not. She was going to save it for her darkest hour. When her mother says, you dress yourself like a harlot, you do nothing that your father wishes, you use this house as a hotel. The girl is going to say, you don't know the half of it, Mother, I've met Quentin Crisp. The other people who visit me are women in middle life, and over again they ask me the same burning question. Is there life after marriage? The answer is no. By now I must know 150 women, well enough for them to tell me the story of their lives. And when I meet them in the street, before they've said hello, long before they've said, how are you, they've said, what do you think he's done now? It stands to reason. The constant proximity of another person will cramp your style in the end, unless that person is somebody you love, and then the burden will be unbearable at once. How can anybody begin each dawn with a fresh assault upon his lifestyle if the moment he opens his eyes, he hears a voice beside him say, and another thing? And if going around in pairs is a mistake, even worse is going around in a heap. Unless it's a heap you can rule, but never be seen tagging along at the tail end of a demonstration. Never be found hopping up and down on the fringe of a pop group. And above all, never, never strike. Do you have strikes in Los Angeles? Whenever I talk to men about strike action, they always say the same thing. It's all right for you. You don't have a wife and kids. I can tell from the sound of their voices that men regard a family as suffering incurred by accident and bravely borne. Even so, you must never strike. There is danger in numbers. They may nudge you into performing an action which is beyond the limits of your chosen style, and in public. The striker makes demands on the dreary grounds that he is one of many, all of whom are alike. But the stylist asks for what he wants in the name of the fact that he is unique, and everything in the world except diamonds, everything, even people, is subject to the law of scarcity value. As it becomes known through your style that deep down there is only one of each of you, then when the time for serious bargaining comes, you will win. But of course, it's not enough merely to get the foundations of your home life squared up. You also have to decide what you're going to do in the outer world. Now, some of you may be so old-fashioned that you still have jobs. If this is so, try not to get stuck in work where you deal with things. And I include the highest possible level of things. Books, paintings, sculpture, they are only objects, just like washing machines, but not so useful. Contrary to what romantic fiction may have told you, the life of a visual artist is a terrible thing. He stands alone all day in his studio, with his feet in a pool of turpentine, and his clothes encrusted with plaster. And that which he has created is taken from this place to a place of execution where it is hanged until it is dead. And all he can do is sit at home and read what it says in the art magazine. You must transcend your medium. By that I mean you must become more wonderful than whatever it is you make. You must be more significantly than you do. And if you possibly can, you must find a way of going to where the cheering and the acclamation are. I'll give you another example. Supposing I could drag onto this stage a huge, great piece of concrete with a hole in it. Everybody would say, it's a Henry Moore. But if I could drag on Henry Moore, none of you would know who he was. So all that chipping, all that chiseling, it's been in vain. You must have a job where you deal with people, because then every working, waking hour you will be secretly polishing up your techniques of self-presentation. There are plenty of such jobs available. There's preaching. Well, we don't have any stylish preachers around now, but there have been miracle workers. Before any of you were born, I saw Amy Semple McPherson. Magnificent, dressed in white from head to foot, and with red, nay, scarlet hair up to here. And she said, "The Lord has sent out his angels on speed bikes of mercy." You could try something like that. Well, if you don't want to be a preacher, you can be a teacher. Teaching is also very stylish because the material in which you're working is nearly always children and teenagers, and they have built-in publicity value. It doesn't matter whether you encourage them or repress them, you're in. And the greatest teaching stylist the world has ever known was a Mr. Braithwaite. He wrote a book called To Sir with Love. It caused a great sensation when it was first published. But in that book there is not one sentence about whether geography is easier to teach than history, or whether girl students learn faster than boy students. It is full of what the children, their parents, and the other members of the staff thought about the writer. So now we know that whatever anyone says they're teaching, their subject is always themselves. Teaching is for teachers, not for students. But if you can't be a teacher, if there's nothing that you know and they don't, then you can try politics. Now, the world's greatest political stylist was Mrs. Perrone. Not the one you got now, the one before that, the one in the musical. I don't know if any of you realize in what a personal and at the same time pervasive way she ruled her kingdom. In England, spelling primers begin with the words, "The cat sat on the mat." No wonder literacy is at a low ebb, when the first glimpse of it is this banal and even distasteful piece of information. But in Argentina, spelling books began, I love Evita. These were the first words that any of her subjects ever learned. But the crowning moment of her entire career as a political stylist came when she rose in her box in the Opera House in Buenos Aires to make a speech. She lifted her hands to the crowd, and as she did so, with a sound like trucks in a railway siding, the diamond bracelet slid from her wrist. When the expensive clatter had died away, her speech began, "We the shirtless." I see you don't really believe in Mrs. Perón. But the Argentinians did, so much so that when she died, they petitioned the Pope to make her a saint. His Holiness declined. But if he'd consented, what a triumph for style that would have been. A double fox stole, ankle-strap shoes, and eternal life. Nobody's ever had that. But you could be the first. But if you feel that all this preaching and teaching and politics, that they're insufficiently physical to embody your idea of yourself, then there's sport. Did you know that Muhammad Ali said, "The boxing was only to bring me to the people"? Think of that. All that diet, all that abstinence, all that downright suffering were only to raise him to a level from which he could still further extend his mammoth lifestyle. And if you think he hasn't done so, remember this. The fight before the final triumph was never once referred to as the contest that unknown gentleman won. It was always regarded as the fight that Muhammad Ali lost. So now we see that having a lifestyle doesn't even depend on doing things right. And even if you feel that you'll never get up early enough in the morning to be any kind of sportsman, all is still not lost, because the career which will give you the most direct route to self-fulfillment is the stage. And you must also remember, when you think about the stage, that the journey made by an actress from anonymity to stardom is the path that all of us must tread in one context or another. In the beginning of her career, an actress plays any number of very different parts, anything she can get, actually. And at that stage, she says that what she enjoys is the variety. Later on, it's noticeable that she plays fewer, larger, more closely related parts. Now, this is like attacking your identity, Red Indian fashion. The circles of experimentation get smaller and smaller until you arrive at the center. In the second half of her career, an actress says that what she likes is the opportunity to study character in depth. She means her own. Because finally, with luck, she finds the one role which fits in every detail her dream of herself. Betty Davis, after many long, dark years, was given the part of Regina in The Little Foxes. And this gave her the chance to say, "Very well then, die." And what do we learn from the glaring eyes and the mouth worn upside down? These features tell us that that's what she'd been waiting to say since 1936. Now, once an actress has discovered this ideal part, from that moment onward, she never looks forward. She's given up the mere profession of acting, and she has entered the profession of being. And this, as I see it, is where all of us in the end belong. Are you still with me? Do you understand this argument? Good, because there is a kind of glow that surrounds many of the people who've succeeded in synthesizing their professional and their personal lives. Joan Crawford. Now, she appeared in any number of movies in which she rose from rags to riches. And in real life, she finally married Mr. Pepsi-Cola. And she had all the luck in the world because he died. It meant that she herself could enter the boardroom of that vast, that worldwide concern, where I presume she said, "Who told you to read the minutes?" I saw Miss Crawford in real life, again at the National Film Theatre. A car as long as the Thames drew up. And from it stepped those two now famous children. They stood in the lobby looking bewildered. And no wonder, because after about 3 minutes, Miss Crawford came out of the same car and kissed the children as though she hadn't seen them for months. And I'd gone up a few steps in order to have a really good view. And for a second she saw me from those great alligator's eyes. It felt as though my image were being burned on the wall behind me. She was incandescent with belief in herself. And not only will having a lifestyle bestow upon you that massive self-confidence, but it will improve the texture of the entire world through which you move. People are always telling me we live in a sex-ridden society. I would have said that we lived in a world corroded with envy. And this notion I have no difficulty in substantiating. When I turn on my television set, what does it show me? Someone stomping through the streets, screeching for equal pay, equal opportunity. Equal is a dead word. Never take as your object in life the desire to be anybody's equal. Once you've entered this profession of being, you have become a professor of a subject on which you are the only living authority. What other people do with their style, with their life, will be a matter of great interest, but it won't be a cause for anxiety. In the last resort, it will not matter. In fact, every morning, you should say to yourselves, preferably aloud, "Other people are a mistake." No, I withdraw that remark. It might be thought sweeping. Say to yourself, concern with other people is a mistake. I know this is not what most people try to teach you, but I want to spare you that heavily advertised scramble for mutual self-sacrifice, in which in the end you've never done enough. Altruism is a debilitating, fragmenting process. But the constant watch over, the constant improvement of, and the presentation of your idea of yourself to others, gift-wrapped, this is a unifying and an invigorating way of life, and it carries with it a special reward, an invitation to the party at the end of the world, that glittering function at which everybody will be speaking and nobody will be listening. And if you're armed with your style, you will be able to run toward that happy hubbub without the faintest fear that you may be out of your depth, without the faintest doubt but that you will shine. And more important than either of these, the burdens of your sorrowful and angry freedom. These problems of who to be and where to go and even what to think, they will fall away from you forever. Now, Andy Warhol is said to be famous for being famous, and doubtless the words were meant as criticism, but really they're the highest praise. They tell us that he will have something to say about lifestyle. And apparently he has. At least I have been told that he has promised to each of us a quarter of an hour of fame before we die. Now, all I am trying to do here this evening is to place into the hands of anybody who wishes to receive it the frame of mind, the philosophy, and the techniques by means of which he will be able to augment that mere moment of glory into a whole long lifetime. Now, we've gone on too long already. What I think we should do now is to have a pause and a good cry. And out there you will find bits of paper on which you can write questions. These will be handed to me when we come back. That is, if you don't want to be identified with your questions. If you don't fear identification, you talk to me from where you sit. I only want to say the words you wish to hear. And also out there, you may find books for sale, which, if anybody would like, I will be pleased to sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the frightening half of the program. Do you ever take a political position beyond pure individualism? No, I don't really believe in politics. To me, politics is the art of making the inevitable appear to be a matter of wise human choice. And I know a lot of people who say that their object is to take their place in society. Don't ever do that. Stay right where you are and wait for society to form itself round you. What advice do you give to those who are afraid of growing old? Can a senior citizen have a lifestyle? Oh, yes, indeed. You may know that Somerset Maugham was once asked to make a speech, and it began, "There are advantages in growing old." And then he paused. And he paused so long that someone thought he was ill and rose to go to his assistant. Whereupon he said, "I was just trying to think of one." However, of course, it's not for me to go on where Mr. Maugham left off, but I do, and I will tell you the advantages of growing old. As it's toward the end of the run, you can overact appallingly. Nearly all of my patients come to therapy with the same complaint. I feel worthless and unlovable. I don't like myself, and I don't see how anyone else can. What would your suggestions be to these patients were you a therapist? Well, of course, they're absolutely right. But they confuse the two things. You don't have to be lovable to other people. You only have to learn to accept. Your very own Danny Kaye said, "You cannot love the world until you've at least settled for yourself." And that's what you have to do. You have to push your neuroses around until they're in a place where they don't hurt. You don't need the love of others. You only need to feel that you have made the most of yourself, that what little you can do and say and be, you have done and said and been. That's all there is. And if you can get your patients to see that I would say that was the answer. Did you like the John Hurt movie based on your life? I was amazed at it, absolutely stunned by it. But of course, first of all, I must say that no credit is due to me for the excellence of that program. The praise belongs to Mr. Mackey, who wrote it, to Mr. Gold, who directed it, and to Mr. Hurt, who has become my representative on earth. But they took enormous trouble. Mr. Hurt wore 5 wigs in all in order to pass from innocence, mouse-colored, through sin, scarlet, to this color, old age. Of course, once you show an art department an actual person, they go mad. They photographed me from above, from below, from the left. I kept saying, does it matter whether it's like my life or not? Because I couldn't see it made any difference. But they were determined it should be. And I'm amazed at the trouble that they took. Did you ever in your life think you'd find yourself on stage entertaining? Well, no, when I was young, I didn't really have any very strong ambitions. At a time when my brothers wanted to be icons of manliness, they wanted to be firemen and the captains of ships, I wanted to be a chronic invalid. I had a certain flair. My parents decided it was too expensive to take up as a career. Now I could get a grant. do you think that Hitler had style? Now, this is a question we often get asked because people feel that style may be a kind of tyranny, something you force upon others. And it isn't. It's simply something you offer to others for their entertainment. But nevertheless, of course, Hitler did have style. If he did not, how would we now have a Germany full of elderly people saying, "I can't think what came over me"? How do you keep the dust from your room off your black velvet suit? Everything is ordinary except that you'll have to jump in the air to put your trousers on. Otherwise, carry on as before. The naked civil servant ends on a depressing note. Are you going to continue your biography in book form? Yes, indeed. I am already now writing a book which will describe everything that happened from the moment I stopped writing The Naked Civil Servant up till now. And it will be called How to Become a Virgin. And of course, the way in which you become a virgin is to go onto television. So if there is anybody in this audience who has some terrible habit of which he's deeply ashamed, don't do it in secret, do it on television. And no one will walk by on the other side of the road saying, "Don't look now, there's that terrible man." They will cross over the road at the risk of losing their own lives to say, "We saw you on the telly." Wit seems such a part of your style. What is wit, and can I become a wit? Yes, indeed, it's quite easy. Wit depends entirely on the order of the words. By nature, we say the most important, the most urgent thing first, and then we say all the qualifying phrases. And this never works. It never becomes a memorable phrase. First of all, I hope we're agreed that wit is not a way of getting your own back on people with minds less nimble than your own. It is any comment on the human condition made in a way that is memorable. And if you can refrain from saying the most important thing first, then you will find that you're able to give what you say this particular pattern, which I take to be wit. One of the Gaiety girls, one of the chorus girls of the beginning of this century, was asked by a televisionary whether she thought that the beginning of the century was really as naughty as we imagine now. And she said, a peculiar morality prevailed at the time. We were allowed to accept gifts of flowers and candies and gloves and furs and jewels and houses and yachts and islands, but never money. And this is the joke. It's only the form that is the joke, as I see it. In 70 years, you have seen a lot of stage and screen stars. What star in the past would you say had the greatest style? Oh, without any doubt, though I don't suppose you've ever seen her, but Miss Bankhead. She had undoubtedly more style than anyone I've ever seen. As an example, she was once in England in a thriller, and when the curtain went up, there was a corpse on the stage. But as it was Miss Bankhead's first entrance, there was wild applause, and she stepped over the corpse. And she came to the footlights and she said, "Thank you, darling." And then she stepped back over the corpse and said, "What are your feelings on psychic phenomena?" I've never known any. I've never seen any. I don't think I have any capacity for metaphysical experience. I think really I have enough trouble with the world as it is. I'm interested. I like movies or plays about ghost stories and supernatural experience, but I've never had any such thing. I don't think I'm tuned in to a point where I could receive it. I'm very materialistic. What advice do you have for aspiring writers? Never read. This is very important. If you read books, in order to improve your writing style, you will find yourself trying to write literature instead of saying what you really mean. It's very important not to get caught up in trying to write better American prose. Don't do any such thing. Just try to think, am I saying what I mean? Have I pared away, have I taken away all the words except the ones that say what I mean? And then your writing will be fine. You have the most wonderful writers in America, really great stylists, people like Damon Runyon. And there's no floweriness, no literary effects in the work of Damon Runyon. He's as neat as he can possibly be. One of his stories begins, "Some parties who do not wish him well have put Maury in some quicklime." Have you met the Queen of England? What about her style? Well, I worry about the Queen of England. And I think that what we have to praise is the graciousness with which she has accepted a style suggested to her by others, because it cannot be natural for the fifth richest woman in the world to have a middle-class image. Now, I regret this, and if I were a member of the royal family, I would be wearing my coronet at breakfast. Do you think you have lived another life? If so, who were you? Well, I must say I can't believe in reincarnation. It doesn't seem to me to work. Mr. Gladstone died as a prime minister and came back as a handbag. Lord Cardigan died a born leader of men and came back as a woolly. So that it's not a very good idea. Also, of course, I don't mind having lived before if I don't know. What I wouldn't like is to step out of my mother's womb and think, here again. So I believe what my nature inclines me to believe, which is that I have not lived before and will not live again. The thing I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy is eternal life. What is charisma? I would say charisma was the ability to influence without the use of logic. How do you feel about suicide? Yes, suicide is the style in death. There is no doubt about this. And you have to think about it. You have to have it up your sleeve. because you may be able to die in circumstances which are significant. But if you don't, then you will have to be ready to commit suicide. Well, if you don't, then you have to consider the alternative, which is lying on an iron bedstead in a rented room with people standing round saying, he can't last much longer. And many people have thrown away their lives, but very few have thrown away their style. Now, Mexico was once ruled by a man called Mr. Villa. And as you know, in Mexico, there's a revolution every Saturday afternoon. And on one of these occasions, he was riding through a Mexican village, and he was shot. And he fell into a greengrocer's shop and lay among the artichokes. And when one of his henchmen rushed up to see if he could be of any assistance, Mr. Villa said, "Don't let it end like this. Say I said something." Do you believe in God? Now, I won't answer this question if it would worry anybody if I did. I don't want to give offense to anybody. Somebody once said, "Why stop now?" when I said that. I can't believe in a God susceptible to prayer. I can't believe that whatever force it is that keeps the spheres revolving in the heavens is going to stop to give me a bicycle with 3 speeds. But if God is the unifying factor, if God is the cell within the cell, the universe that encompasses the universe, the cause behind the cause, and if prayer were a way in which you aligned your body with the forces that flow through the universe, then I would accept prayer. Then I would accept the idea of a God. And don't forget, almost all religions move toward the unifying factor, the God behind the gods, the God of gods. Even the Greeks, they believed in Jupiter. Mind you, he was the only person ever to remain in office after it was discovered he was a sex maniac. But nevertheless, even they wanted this unifying factor. I don't know why the human mind looks for this, but if I could stand on this stage and utter a series of numerals which explained all organic forms, everyone would go mad. It wouldn't make the faintest difference to our lives. It's just that this is what the human mind seeks, the one explanation of everything, which I take to be God. Is that an answer? To what do you attribute the human race's revised opinion of yourself? Well, chiefly, of course, to my having been on television. Perhaps as it's such an important adjunct to your style, I ought to explain how television works. It's like a geography exam. You can't study the whole world. So the night before the test, you get your atlas from its shelf and you open it, and it says China. So you study China. And the next day, the main question in your paper is France. So your answer begins, France is not like China. If you translate that into television terms, it means that you arrive at the studios with a wonderful anecdote about your mother, and some clock says, "How's your father?" And you've a second in which to say, Father's worn out coping with my mother. Who? So you say what you've come to say, no matter what. What your advice be to young gays? Neither confirm nor deny. And by that I mean don't, of course, get involved with your parents or anybody else in a conversation which leads them to believe that you are going to marry some person of the opposite sex with whom you've been to the movies twice. On the other hand, don't waltz down to breakfast with the words, "Guess what?" Can style get in the way of people getting to know each other? Oh no, it is the means by which people get to know one another. If you have about you all that you truly are, people recognize you at once. They know what attitude toward you is relevant. Nobody ever talks to me about the weather. Your style is a form of communication. I can't think of a question. Go on to the next card. What technique do you use in making important decisions in your life? And is this technique applicable to many situations? Well, I actually never make decisions. I started off in life with a weak character. And if you have a weak character and you acquire an agent, your character falls to pieces altogether. And now when people say to me in the street, "Hello, how are you?" I reply, "I have no idea. You'll have to ask my agent." What is your opinion of the New York taxis and taxicab drivers? I find them absolutely amazing. They are totally devoted to the theory of personality. And at first I couldn't understand it, but now I do understand it a lot better. You see, if you don't like people and you have driving skills, you would get your job in one of those lorries which drive right across the country and where you never speak to anybody. You hardly see anybody except the hitchhikers whom you ravish and whose used bodies you fling out into the hedges. But if you have driving skills and you do like people, then you have a taxi. Who will you meet? The rich, the desperate, and the famous. And on one occasion, I was driving in a taxi along Sunset Boulevard, and the taxi driver stopped the taxi and he said, "I've got to ask you this. What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I'm in the profession of being." And he said, "I do a bit of that in my spare time." What made you different? Why do you refuse to compromise when most people find it easy to do so? Well, I'm not a dropout. I was never in. There was never the faintest hope I would be able to disguise myself as a real person. And after a bit, of course, if your every move is questioned, every word you say is contradicted, you must form an image of what other people think of you. You must stand outside yourself and look back and say, what causes all this comment? And finally, I understood what you can see in a second. that my sin was my inability to refrain from adding my entire being to whatever I was saying. Now, in England, this is more important than it is in America, because the higher up the social scale you go in England, the smaller the movements become. And if you've been to Eton, you never move your face at all. So having me standing there, swishing about, flapping my hands, rolling my eyes, all these signs were what my friends called a dead giveaway. What do you do about your faults? You weave them into your style. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be anything. You just have to accept what you are. People have thought sometimes that when I recommend having a lifestyle, that I'm urging them to be more and more eccentric. In fact, one evening, a man said, all you want us to do is to wear funny clothes. I want you to wear funny clothes if you're funny people. But if, when you look into your soul, you find you're ordinary, then ordinary you must be. But you must be so ordinary that you can imagine someone saying, come to my party and bring your humdrum friend, and that means you. I'm afraid of flying. Since you come from a time without airplanes, and now must do a great deal of flying, any advice? Go to sleep. It's what I do on airplanes. I don't believe in jet lag. There's no such thing, especially when you come from England to America, because all the plane has to do is go up in the air and pause there, and America comes by. What can formal education teach youth today that is important? Nothing. It's no good acquiring facts about anything except yourself. The rest you can find in the public library. Why do you want to leave England? I don't want to leave England. I want to come to America. In fact, I would like to do both, to live in both places. And in a way, I regard England as an island off the coast of America. But I haven't enough money to pay 2 rents, so I have to live one place or the other. And the moment I saw New York, I wanted it. Well, now we've come to the end of the questions, but we have a few minutes. We could have a question or two from anyone who wanted to say anything. Yes.
I've been living with somebody for a number of years, and I've been trying to get rid of him and end the relationship because I'd like to be on my own and living alone. How do you suggest that I get rid of him? I've just been terribly unsuccessful.
Shoot him.
Chris, you've been very candid with us this evening, and I'd like to ask this one question. Have you ever had sex with a woman?
No, I haven't, but I do realize that the question is relevant. I now know a lot of homosexuals who popped into bed with women in a spirit of hilarious research. One last wild question.
Do you think maybe someone could say you're a witty Norman Vincent Peale?
I don't know. People do make comparisons between me and other people, chiefly Mr. Wilde, of course, whose idea of style, I think, was mistaken, personally. He said, in matters of great importance, it is not sincerity that matters, but style. But to me, they're the same thing. I think we have to stop now, sad to say. But before we do, I would like first of all to thank you all for staying so long. And then to say that, of course, I realize that in any group of people, there are those who do not want a style. I'm trying to speak to anybody here who feels that the band always seems to be playing in another street, who seems to be locked in his room. And when I say the door is not locked, go to where the band is playing. I don't want anyone to say, I haven't a thing to wear. As I see it, all you have to wear is yourselves. And what I think gives me the right to say so is this. If I, who am nothing, who am nobody, have got to Los Angeles with my fare paid, anyone can do it. And what makes the message urgent is that the benefits are very considerable, though they may not be what you imagine. People rush up to me and say, now that you're rich and famous. They never get any further because I stop them. As you all know perfectly well, I am not famous, I am notorious. And if I am rich, it is because I have taken my wages in people. You are my reward. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What will be your last words on earth? I haven't the faintest idea. I don't know. I've never thought about it. But you're quite right. I will have to think about it. We'll have to make sure that we say the right thing at the end.